Welcome to Mindful Drawing. I'm Robert, and I'll be your guide on this meditation practice that enters a space of mindfulness through the act of drawing. Past several episodes have been fairly abstract, more about shapes slowly building into some degree of organic character. I thought this time we'd take a little different approach, something I don't do as often, but a bit of a representational sketch of a memory, bringing something well known to mind and then seeing if we can approach it on the page, going through some of the techniques that allow it to shape and form slowly, not worrying too much about its precision, but about navigating that interface between the paper, the instrument, and what we may lightly imagine in our mind. And some people may have a strong, crisp, clear image there of what we bring as our subject. Others, it may fluctuate, move around, blend, never quite fully stabilize. And that's okay. We have a guiding shape or form, and some ways to apply detail to reinforce that shape in 3D and space and give it a little bit of environment and texture. So as you start thinking about the exercise, our subject will be an apple. Common. Most people have seen one. You can engage with one and maybe even deeply imagine and think about some of the details that are there. Bring them to the mind. Let them become the image behind the eyes that guides our imagining. A memory of a thing tactile and held, full of texture, color, and variation that can then deposit out, diffuse onto that page from the blurriness of our remembering. I'm going to use a pen to get things started, mostly because it'll be a little bit clearer on the image in the video and the drawing, but because I like the way the pen feels and it brings a hardness. They can also have a light and softness and encourages playing with how to get a difference from a sharp, crisp line. Then I'll switch in to pencil at some point to add a little bit of shading and texture, a little bit of shadow, just because it deposits material nice and quick and lets us work smoothly. But whatever works for you, bring that. Charcoal would be great for a drawing like this, a soft graphite, or even a nice marker. Whatever you choose as your expression, go ahead and gather your supplies, establish your space, and let's draw together. So I thought we'll do just like a subject-oriented drawing today, but if you want to change or adjust the subject, feel free. It's very simple. We'll draw an apple or two. Just because it's a nice, simple fruit, smooth, but if you come from where I come from, they have lots of blemishes, so you don't have to be too perfect. I grew up on an organic farm. Fruit doesn't look pretty, it just tastes good. We'll probably work between pen and pencil just for fun, some for speed if we do some shadows or things. I guess we could do a little warm up just to get comfortable with the idea, the subject. Again, not so important if it looks real or not, but we've all seen an apple. It's kind of round, and it has some bumps and knobs depending on what you like or are familiar with. And because of that roundness, we can get away with mostly its profile to start. So you might just begin on your warm up of quickly sketching out whether that's kind of rough, like a sketchy thing, or a smooth movement. That basic half of an apple shape that comes together somewhere and mirrors itself roughly to the other side. And at the bottom, they may have a couple little knobby bumps that connect, or some larger ones, depending. And in the warm up, might be a little wobbly, but just getting a sense of how you see and subject this apple out onto the page there. And some parts of it that you might want to focus on. I'll move through different layers to it. Might have a little background somewhere in there. We have this place, and it might have a stem that comes out. It's cute. It might have a little leaf left on that stem, kind of thing. We might focus a bit on its smooth roundness. So just starting to emphasize some of the curvature at the edges, which gradually reduces in. We might emphasize dips and folds to give it a little bit of character, pulling a little bump in. Maybe you draw the apple cut in half and you want to talk about the core and some seeds kind of thing. All up to you, but we'll just start with that basic object. Give it a little bit more time and forming and experimenting with its surface. And then I think we'll bring in some shadow, which is kind of drawing it slightly oblique, skewed, and at a bit of an angle, depending on where you want the shadow to go, forward or backward behind it, to give some depth on the page. And if we have time, add a couple more, play with some other fruits or something. So the big thing first is just that rough, round feeling there. And if it helps to work with the pencil, because you can do it light and move around a bit, feel free to use that. Just do the pen, it shows up a little better. Maybe the pencil for some shading and shadow to add surface if we like. This will be a big kind of question, perhaps, of composition. Nothing in terms of structure, depth to the page, or just that open emptiness to become familiar with. Take our time in entering that rectangular space and seeing if we can tease out through our mind, imagination, through these instruments, something that resembles a thing we've seen. So where it sits, middle, center, a little off to the side, and change how we perceive it. But take a moment in your mind, see where your eye and hand are drawn on the paper. Maybe one area is a little bit more comfortable to work in, work far away, a little more challenging for keeping your curves or lines. Feel out that area with a little bit of movement, and then once you settle into it with the hand, take a few deep breaths just to align everything else with that position so it doesn't get in the way as you bring your attention inward to the drawing. A couple of deep breaths to fully expand the rib cage and the spine. Exhalations to roll and drop the shoulders back into their socket. Nice and ready to work through the forming of a thing on the paper. And as in the warm-up, starting at a place, top, bottom, visualize where that might be on the fruit. Make a couple of little marks. It's a soft shape, organic, so we can feather a few things in just to break that emptiness of the page, and then begin to travel along that curve at whatever speed works for you, large, small, heavy, or light. Shape of an ear, that compressed half circle taking form there. And then taking a moment to think about, I drew to my right with my right hand, kind of an easy way to move and stay outside of the line, but I'm now faced with going to the left. I stay with my right hand for comfort and ease to the line. Then I have to work in a slightly awkward way, so you might take your time with it, bring a little more attention to that different feeling of working on two sides of a somewhat symmetrical object, working around the space with your hand, and filling out the rest of that kind of profile. Yeah, nice natural shape, so a bump or squiggle here or there is just character to the figure. And I like to give the edges just a little bit of softness by coming back very lightly along them. Maybe a little emphasis around the top or the bottom. Just kind of grounding it there on the page without one single hard, sharp line, nor softening of that edge blurs around with light and environment and reflection. And we have the soft outline formed. We'll give it some detail, some characteristic, starting up at the top. That round shape continues all the way around in the background, maybe with a little bumpiness. We've seen some apples, they tend to indent where the blossom was, but no significant transition there, just a moment where the stem pops off. Taking your time to work into there to kind of soften and round. I had a strong indent, more like a cut shape, and that part of it might be hidden behind, or it's looking a little towards us in its rotation. And then you feel comfortable in that overall shaping. Just a little bit back there. We bring a stem to it. The stem is that element that suspends it. It's full of tension, so it takes the shape of tension. It brings some things to mind, like an arch, a catenary curve, stems or grass, like bending a little bit in the wind, but not too stiff, bouncy, light to hold this there for its time while it ripens and prepares. Form in the mind a little bit of that curvature, a direction, out left or right, kind of straight that you want to work with. And then as you're ready, begin to engage with that with a nice, slow forming. Moving in a singular arc to give a little bit of direction. Repeating on that. Give it a little bit of thickness. The stem very thin and then has that little knob at the end where it breaks off of the branch. A little thickening at both ends for a little bit more support. Stretched just to its limit somewhere in the middle. It may cross over some stuff in the background. We can bring dimension to it with a little layering of line. Something that stands out as rougher, separate, a little bit in shade. And if you're so inclined, perhaps for fun, a little leaf coming out. Again, that curve, tension. And the leaf kind of sprung there from that curve can move in quicker motions to give it a feeling of suspending into space. And now we begin to see, and maybe our imagination gets triggered just a bit more in terms of memory of a thing we've probably all interacted with. Maybe you haven't interacted with an apple, I don't know, maybe a tomato, a potato, a pear, any other round-ish object that grows from a stem. And we'll take our breath's time to bring definition to that spherical object there in space. I'm going to start with a little towards the middle, give a little bias coming out of that dip to one side, very light, gentle flicks, but not too much in one direction. Just a marking of the surface to indicate very lightly that something might be happening on both sides of the center. Coming up a little from the bottom, a little from the top. Just a little fuzzing up those specks and lines to take the apple. Taking a breath as you need to align or realign to position. Noticing the speed of the breath there. Long, slow draw and exhalation. The little quick burst of expression out onto the paper. A little bit of center forming. And we'll work to the outside edge. Start just a little general to, it probably has some shine, some glare reflection, strong reiteration of the shape, left or right, doesn't matter, but once I'm using pen, that becomes a sharp edge. And that sharp edge may dither with that reflection, layering, becoming more dense towards the outside to give it a roundness. Little bursts of shine here and there. With no light, it all just has a bit of its own shape, subtle variations in the surface. A time to play in that. No worries if it's not a clear picture in the mind, just striping, layering, reinforcing that roundness, changing from the strong curve to a nearly straight line in the middle and back to a strong curve. With little bumps here and there to suggest some change in direction. The bottom maybe coming in just a tad. Space between two bumps, realigning back to that center. The edges softening, thickening with density as material glances past the horizon. Letting the figure, form, texture, shape of this thing you've seen come to the mind, but just through some simple techniques of lightly reinforcing edges. And the representation of a thing becomes a part of that meditation, a part of that presence. In some ways, seeing what we can hold as an image in the mind. Another layer to it, seeing what we can bring out through whatever constraints of the medium we have. This may be a place where pencil, graphite, charcoal can start to let more softness, more variation in light and texture play a role if you'd like to switch into that or are already working with that. But I like the pen and thinking back to memories of apples held in the hand or before eaten, looking a little bit at the skin, noticing the little dots, the stripes, or the streaks that may take place. And we can start to add memories of detail into some areas. If they're apples like I am used to, they have little scabs here and there. Apple skin protecting itself. A little bit. And we'll see those pores that allow it to breathe, show up, dimple the surface ever so slightly, even though it may look quite smooth. They bring roughening to the shape, the dot of slightly graded elements, further defining that roundness in space, a way to measure with the eyes, a way to see the edge become more dense in the center. Take a few moments just to play with whatever details come to mind. The apple may become a strange hybrid of many things. Each has its own characteristics. If you have a strong type that you see, or an amalgam through the memory of the many different apple varieties out there. Just adding little bits and bobs, touches of density and detail, feathering the edges, and occasionally bringing that sharpness of reflection, the strong line or edge. Looking at what you mark with the pen, not worrying or concerning too much with the overall at any one time, because with this drawing act we could reshape, reform, and figure the surface. It's layering bits of detail and suggestion that slowly encourage the mind to see something in a way. So as we work into it, the layers will reveal over time, perhaps converging towards something we're familiar with, perhaps a divergence towards something new and playful to express. If you have a pen, we're going to bring in a little shift in density and color, filling in some surface areas, bringing a little maybe darkness to the lower half, a little lighterness to the upper half as light may shine over, following its contours, its edges, softening the hard pen if you have, or the harder lines from earlier drawing, smoothing surface with the graphite, hiding nooks and crannies into the shade. Always returning to that outer edge. All the way around 360 can always be a guide towards the inside. The new edges you've brought through just playing in that space, reinforced with a little bit of tone or texture, or just more accumulation of the ink, whatever's handy for you. And thinking a bit on the experience of having something only formed in the imagination, formed from memory or direct imaging, not having a subject to verify the little details of light maybe shining there, to make sure there's accuracy to the orientation, but doing your best layer by layer, imagining to hold an image connection that slowly bridges what you might first see to what emerges on the page. Slowly, the thing on the paper may begin to take over in the mind, noticing the shift between I see something there to I want to see something there, vice versa. The imagining a desire, a new element on the paper, the real subject. And to give it a little bit of presence on the page, bring some shadow into play, to consider the composition here. An object, in my case, roughly on thirds horizontally, but somewhat centered vertically, could use a little engagement with the left side. As you may draw and feather and play in the space you've made, take a few breaths to slow that movement down, to even bring the pen or pencil to a stop or a rest. Close the eyes for a moment as you breathe. That new image seen for the last 15 minutes or so, present behind those eyes, seen inside. Fuzzy, not quite fully resolved. Take a nice deep inhale or two. Watch what happens to that image imagined in the mind. And as you feel ready on an exhalation, reopen those eyes. See the page and composition. And make a choice of direction that a shadow may lie. And I will take it out, up to the left, as if a light were shining, and up from the right. This thing no longer sitting, floating in space on the page, but having a connection to a surface. And that shadow can't emerge from nowhere. It comes from the edges of the piece. Maybe loosely at the bottom. It's a low light, could go far and long out. So I'm tracking our curve again. The same general idea. Up and around, finding the center area, and then back towards the other side. Measuring, we're just giving direction, angle there. Feeling it out, maybe trying a few if you like. Right, lower, flatter. May feel more table-like. This more seamless-like. Finding something that looks like the shape of the shadow to you very lightly. And when you have one to follow, start at the bottom to bring that little bit of darkness underneath. The pen lines still standing out a bit with the shadow grabbing some of them. And take this lower shadow. Give it a little more shape and figure. Notice the stem lightly reflected there, a small element with light bending around it. Won't have too much detail, but a little. Some remembrance of the leaf faded in. And then we use shading to draw out from the object. Start to fill that space all the way around. The shadow generally even. A nice moment of repetition, of moving the pencil or pen lightly in a direction, finding darkness and softness from an edge. Shadow has no internal definition or shape. It is only the object blocking light, and a little scatter of light bouncing around or engaging with the material. So we can move around, play a little bit, keep directionality for evenness, work back and forth, to give it a little bit coarser feel and grain. Slowly bringing the edge of the object out to meet the edge of its projection. Bringing the outside of the shadow in to meet the object. And then beginning to play, give it a little bit of character. Again, shadow technically mostly even without other environmental factors. But a little modeledness, bumpiness there. Let me help to bring it out on the page and just let the pen or pencil speak a little bit of its own language until it's filled to some degree with whatever character you bring to that drawing. It's not a rendering, but a memory lightly projected onto the paper. And in the last couple of minutes, perhaps, using the choice of where the light is to bring slight darkness to one part of the apple shape. The light mostly coming from the left here. From the right for me, giving the left a little bit more density of material, density of edge and line. Slowly it fades out around the form. The light catching more of those edges in long shadows, distinguishing one side a little more from the other. And since without eraser, can't go lighter, you just go a little darker, a little heavier, to bring that subtle emphasis to mind. A little roundness to a shape. Some bumps and speckles. Maybe a nice bend and tension to its connection in a little world, forming potential in that shadow. As you feel ready, you can bring the pencil to rest or the pen down. Again, taking some moments with eyes closed, try to remember the memory on the paper. Try to remember the memory that started its shape. Being inside and that subtle overlay of two things blurring, blending together. Take a couple of deep breaths to center, to let that memory stack merge. And then with your final breath on the exhalation, the stack blows away like the dust of the graphite. When you're ready, you open your eyes and see something formed on the paper. Close, but unique. It's its own expression of that moment. I have to say that if representational sketching or drawing is not something you've spent a lot of time practicing, it may become quite challenging to feel comfortable with that thing on the page looking anything like what you see in your mind at first. And especially without a subject, one in front of you to look into, to observe the details. Right? We're drawing solely on a memory, a forming of that image internally, which takes practice, takes a lot of attention and focus to the mind. And so in this exercise, breathe out any maybe frustration or discomfort that might come from the results you see. Or you could treat it like a bad tattoo and just fill it all in with ink, and it just becomes the shape, the cutout of an apple, and maybe the graphic becomes interesting. But it's not really about how well we represent it. It's practicing that negotiation, practicing that interface between imagining and depositing something here on the paper, drawing it out of nothing. And with time, with practice, maybe a more direct practice if it interests you to become more representational in what you draw, actually having the apple there, holding it, trying to see its shape, see its shade, or shine, shadow, the little details and textures. Recreating it builds up that mindful attention to something in the world and the capacity to hold it longer as an image and have the techniques to let it become something on the paper. But from time to time, put the subject away and try to do the imagining. Things will be off, things will be wrong, but you'll notice them and you'll be aware of where you may need a little more practice. I wish you well on whatever your art and creative journey may be, whether it's just some time to play and move that pencil around and see what comes out, or really diving into developing a hand, an eye, and an expression all your own. I thank you for joining in these mindful exercises, and I'd love to hear what you felt, what you found, what you thought of your final drawing. Just leave a comment below and give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Share with some friends. Come back each week, usually on Wednesday. This is Robert, signing off. Draw well.